Hey, so welcome back to my channel. I am Jason, and this is from Sin's Perspective Reviews, where I review and give commentary on movies and TV shows. Okay, so I know it's been a while since I posted, but a lot of the shows that I'm interested in, they really haven't started back up yet. Like my recent post, The Umbrella Academy, is supposed to start on Friday, so I can't wait for that. Another show that I thought was going to come back this year, it may still come back later this year, was The Haunting of Hill House, but of course it was going to be a different house. So that's pretty much why I haven't really been posting a lot. But I did come across a show that I think is pretty good. You know, I've watched the first episode, and it's called Mrs. Wilson, and it's an Amazon Prime show. Well, actually, it's PBS Masterpiece Theater, which I think is like $5 or $6 a month. And it's 3 episodes. It's actually based on a true story. And it's I just watched season 1, episode 1, and I have to say that I like it. It's pretty, engaging. It kind of starts off, where you think it's going to be, about this couple, and it seems like they have this idyllic life, and then obviously life throws her a curveball, and she's now it seems like she's trying to figure out, like, how well does she know her husband and who he really is. So Mrs. Wilson, season 1, episode 1. So she, Alison Wilson is a typist, and you see her, she's leaving work. She's going home for lunch, and she's going home so she can make lunch for her husband, Alexander Wilson. So you can see, first off, he's an older gentleman, and he's sitting at a typewriter, and he's typing, and apparently he's an author, and they exchange some words back and forth. And she goes in to prepare lunch, and she calls out to him, but he doesn't respond. And so she goes through the house kind of looking for him, and she finds him in the bedroom. She did mention when she first went into the kitchen to make lunch, she did remind him to take his pills. And so I'm assuming that's what happened. He went to go get his pills. And so she goes into the bedroom, and she sees him collapsed on the floor. She tries to help him, but at this point it is too late. Now, I should have started off by saying that now this is taking place in London, 1962-63. So at this point, they've been together for about 20 years. They have 2 sons, Nigel and Gordon. Gordon is the oldest. He's in the Navy, and Nigel is still in high school. And so at this point, it's just her and her husband. She calls the priest, and he, of course, make arrangements to go over to give the last rites. And then there's another number she calls where the woman she says that Alex told me to call this number in the event if something happens. And so the person on the other end says, well, thank you, that's pretty much all we need from you. And so you can see her face. She's kind of, when the person answers the phone, you can tell that it's a voice that's familiar to her. But she obviously she's still grieving her husband. She lost her husband, and she's still kind of in shock. And so the priest comes over. The priest comes over. He does the rites, and she takes his wallet after the priest. He says there's the last rites, and he leaves. And they're still waiting for the ambulance to come to get the body, or the coroner to come and pick up the body. And so while she was alone with his body, she took his wallet out and hid it. So around this time, the youngest son comes home. Nigel comes home. Obviously, he's clueless. And then obviously she has to tell him. There's this whole emotional scene, and she is basically just trying to keep a stiff upper lip. Trying to just take it through, deal with the things that she needs to do. So later that evening, you can hear she's like scrubbing the floor like a mad when she's cleaning her kitchen. And I'm assuming it's just something to occupy her time and her mind, because when things like that happen, you kind of sit around and the stuff just plays over and over. And I guess she's just was just basically trying to occupy her time. So the doorbell rings. It's her neighbor Olive. Olive is a black woman who is her neighbor. She brings over a casserole. Obviously at this point everybody knows that Alexander's passed away, and so she just wanted to, this is what people do. They bring, food over for the family, because the last thing you want to think about is the last thing you think about is food when you're grieving. And so she brought over casserole, and they said their thank yous, and she went back to what she was doing. And so you see Nigel is in the room, and he's going through slides, photos of him and his dad and the family, and they're talking for a little bit. And then there's the doorbell ring. There's another person at the door, so she goes down to see who it is. And the woman, she says that she verified where she was. She said, "This is Alexander Wilson's address," and Allison said yes. And she said, "Oh, you must be his landlord." And Allison said, "No, I'm his wife. I'm Mrs. Wilson." And you could have knocked that woman over with a feather. This is an older woman who looks to be around, his age. And she kind of asked the woman, like, are you okay? The woman said, "No, I'm Gladys Wilson. I'm his wife." And so now you have these two women who are claiming to be married to Alexander Wilson. And so of course they're both confused, and Allison is like, no, like, I don't know who you are. This is my husband. We've been together, so much. Did she say how long they've been together? But basically she was like, she just wasn't trying to hear. No, you're not. He told me he was married before, but that you guys got a divorce. I have the divorce decree. We've been married for such a stuff. And basically, around this time, Nigel had called her, and so she basically closed the door in the woman's face. And Nigel was like, "Who was that?" And she said that, that was one of his cousins. And he was like, "Well, why didn't you let her in?" She was like, "Oh, we just didn't get along." And so she was basically able to explain it away. Now, I'm not sure if he really bought that, but okay. We just moving on. We just gonna go ahead and move on. So the next thing you know, you see Allison going through a bunch of papers I guess she was trying to find this divorce decree. And she came across a document that said Official Secrecy Act. And so throughout the episode, there are going to be flashbacks of around the time they actually met, which is around World War II. He works in an intelligence office. She actually typed his conversations, like his transcripts and all that, kind of stuff. So he would be one of the people listening in, because he spoke Arabic. He may have spoken some other languages, and so they would, be eavesdropping on, conversations, and he would translate that, and then she would type it up. And so at the time, and this was like the 1942, something like that, around this time. And so at the time, she knew he was married, and she was talking to, it was another woman, another typist who sat across from her that, basically talked about how his marriage, so she knew he was married. So that wasn't a secret. And so you could see him kind of courting her. They had gone out a couple of times, and so they had gone to a restaurant, and you could tell that she was kind of nervous. I mean, she's this younger woman, this is older man with this distinguished career, and she was young and inexperienced, so you could tell she was kind of nervous. And so she ends up spilling some wine on her and on herself. And so she goes into the bathroom and she's trying to wipe this stuff off. And then this woman was like, "Oh, are you okay?" She was like, "Oh yeah, I just spilled some wine on me." And the lady was like, "Okay." And so she kind of just walked out. Okay, so now we flash back to the present, where the next morning, of course, she goes to Coleman's home, and Coleman was first like, "Well, how did you find out where I live?" And she said, "Well, I followed Alex one day." Coleman was Alex's handler, so he was her point of contact when she was his point of contact, I guess, whenever he was out on missions and that kind of stuff. So she goes and she sits down with her, and she starts telling her about, this woman shows up, this Gladys Wilson shows up, and saying that she's married. And I'm like, when I was telling her no, that they were divorced. And so Coleman was basically like, he was a good man. She really wasn't trying to say too much, Allison asked her, do you have any records? Because I'm assuming you would have done a background check on him. And so Coleman was basically like, nothing. We have information on him, but nothing that I can give to you. And so she kind of put in her head, like, he was an intelligence officer. Basically his job was to lie for a living, and it wouldn't be above him to forge documents. And so, of course, she said, of course, Coleman was like, well, I'm not saying that's what he did, but I'm saying that if that was something that he wanted to do, he was perfectly capable and had the know-how and to do that. And of course, she's not really ready to believe that this man that she loved and built this life with and had 2 children with has been lying to her for 20 years. And so Coleman basically wants her to kind of let things go, to drop it, and to move on. But of course, she's devastated. She's now questioning, like, who was this guy? Who was he? And so we flash back to so it's 1942, and I may have gotten some of my notes mixed up. Hold up. Okay, so we flash back. Okay, it's her birthday, and so they're on another date, and he gives her this ink pen as a birthday gift. And then she was like, okay, so he basically said he had 2 gifts for her. And so the next gift he gave her, it was this folded up piece of paper. And so she opens it, and it's his divorce decree. And so he's, telling her, so this is how she knows that this divorce decree exists, even though at the time she couldn't find it. In present day she couldn't find it, but he gave her this paper telling her that his divorce with this other woman was over. And he even said, I'm not sure if I'm really, the greatest person for you. Like, they acknowledge that the age difference and the fact that he's been divorced and she's Catholic, and they don't really believe in divorce. And it was, it was kind of a touch and go for a minute. But you could tell he won her over, and they, continue talking. And of course, the night proceeded. And so what you saw is they flashed to over in the corner. It was the same woman that saw her in the bathroom, and she was kind of just standing in the corner just watching them. So it's like, okay, who is this woman? So she's back at Allison is back at her apartment, and she's writing a note to her mother. And then the next thing you know, it all goes, you hear a bomb drop and everything is dark. And so next thing you see is a bunch of rubble. I think that's what they could call the Blitz, like when the Germans came through and bombed, pretty much destroyed most of London. Luckily, obviously she survived, but of course she's devastated. She's distraught. She's in shock. Everything that she owns is now gone. And so she walks to where she knows Alex is. He takes her in, and she gets cleaned up. And of course, this is the night, of course, but they eventually end up having sex. Okay, so we go back to present day, where they're sitting down with the priest, and both sons are there now, and they're making the funeral arrangements. And so she saw this car pull up, and this guy get out, and he's walking up to the door. And of course, she meets him at the door. She excuses herself and meets him at the door. And she's like, okay, well, who are you? And he said, I'm Dennis Wilson. I'm Gladys Wilson's son. And she's, so the next thing you see them in like this diner or this cafe, and they're talking, and she's showing him, I guess that was their marriage certificate. And he was like, well, my parents are still married. And she's trying to tell him, no, they're not. She was like, my mother would know if she signed a divorce decree. No divorce decree exists. And we want his body for the funeral. And of course she's like in shock, and she obviously, because at this point she has not said anything to her sons. And so she's trying to figure out how she's going to get out of this situation. So she's basically saying, no, they're not married, I'm his wife, and so he basically told them, if he gave you a divorce decree, we want to see it. And that was pretty much it. So we can't just take your word for it. We want to see this document. Okay, so this is when we flash back to London, 1942, where at this point, Gordon is born. He's a baby, And Alex is telling Allison that he's going to have to go undercover, and that because he speaks Arabic, so they want him to go undercover. And she's like, well, they're not going to accept you in. They said, well, I know we're going to have to pull this whole ruse where I get arrested. It's going to have to be a public affair where I get arrested, and I'm going to look like I defected, and I'm I'm resentful and grudgeful, and I've turned on my country to try to get into these people good graces so I can get the information that we need. Okay, so they're at the park, he's in his uniform, and a police officer and two guys in suits came. They got him, put him in handcuffs, and took him away. So of course it was this whole scene that she had to play up, and she's like has to pretend to be all emotional and confused, like, okay, what is going on? What's going on? So they drag him off. Okay, so she in present day. So we flash back to the present, and she goes to the records office, whatever their records office is called, and to get a copy of the divorce decree. And so basically the woman at the window said there's no such thing, that we don't have a divorce decree, it doesn't exist. If we don't have this document, that means that they're still legally married. And so she gave her this book where they keep these divorce decrees. And so she's looking through the book, and what she did, which I thought was so trifling, she actually took a divorce decree out of this book, took it home, got her typewriter, okay, and she whited out some stuff and typed it. I mean, like, she basically edited this thing to make it look like this is a legitimate document that she got from this records office, okay? So, we flash back, okay, so, she get word that his whole mission is over, and she was trying to find out why is he not home yet, because at this point she's been stuck with this toddler. They have this baby, and she's trying to figure out, okay, where's her husband? She goes to see Coleman obviously is not telling her anything, like, you need to go home, and just you need to go home and wait for your husband. And she was like, well, it's been a while, he hasn't shown up. Coleman is not telling her anything. Go home, wait for your husband. But eventually he does appear. Okay, so while she's sitting typing up forging this divorce decree, they're doing flashbacks back and forth where she's typing up this decree, and she's thinking back on when he's telling her that he has to go on another mission. And she's kind of like, okay, you just got home, Okay, so she now has what she feels as the proof that she needs, because she wants these other people to just go away. Okay, so she goes to Gladys' house. So she goes to Gladys' house, okay, and Dennis Wilson, he opens the door, and he said he went to go get his mother, and what she saw in the next room was he had a little desk and this typewriter set up much like he had at her house. And so on the desk she saw a family photo of Dennis, Gladys, and it was another guy, and so she could see that this is real and legitimate, and that this woman is not making this stuff up. So Dennis he comes back down, and he says that my mother she's just not feeling well. All of this has just been too much for her, and she really doesn't want to see you. And so she pulls out this forged divorce decree and gives it to Dennis. And Dennis is like, okay, he's looking, and it was something about the dates. He was like, wait a minute. During this time, my mother was out of town taking care of her sister who was sick. And so she was like, well, maybe she came back to to sign the paper, and he was like, there's something about this isn't right. And so he basically threatened her and was like, if we don't come get to the bottom of this, I'm going to have to make official inquiries. And she's like, well, what does that mean? I'm going to go to the police, and I'm going to have them do an investigation. So now she realizes this is not something that's just going to go away. And if he does that, then everybody, including her sons, are going to know what's going on. So she finally kind of, you could say that just took the wind out of her sails. She kind of sits down. She has a good cry. And he's basically saying, all we want is the body. And she was like, because he's like, she's still trying to keep up the pretense. He was like, basically, my mother's been getting his pension for the last however many years. And so she was like, well, that's just a clerical error that we'll need to deal with. And he's not going. So he basically says, we want the body, and he's going to be buried here. And he's trying to be amiable because he understands this is an unusual situation. So he's saying that they can continue to have the service that they were going to have for him, but that he would be buried up where him and his mother lives. And so, and they would have to use a name that they knew him by, because when she showed him the marriage certificate, she was like, this isn't even the name that he changed his name. And she was like, okay. So she reluctantly agreed to that. And, she finds out that, this wasn't some kind of fly-by-night situation. He said that, he told her that, no, he actually had a relationship with his father. He said his father would always, he'd come to visit. He would send money. He'd never missed one of his birthdays. And this guy is clearly a lot older than Gordon and Nigel. Like I said, his mother is older, so I don't know if that would have been she would be considered his first wife, because they do look closer in age. And so he said he never missed a birthday. And so, the next day, Allison has to go to the funeral home, I guess, to make these changes. And so she basically, hit me with the story about, I let my son fill out the paperwork, and of course he had just lost his dad, and I shouldn't have done that, and so I need to make some changes. She wants to make changes to the name, and she wants to change where he's going to be buried. And so the guy was like, okay, that's perfectly fine. Our job is to make things as easy as possible for you. Okay, so they took care of that. Okay, so the day of the service, they come into the church, and she looks over. I don't know if that was Gladys or if that was Coleman. I couldn't really tell. But she looks over, and she looks kind of shocked I knew it was a woman. Okay. So she continues forward, and then Gordon, he stands up and he gives a speech about his dad and how close they were, and the whole thing. And so the camera pans back, and then you see this woman again, the same woman that you saw in the corner of the restaurant watching them, and the same woman that you saw in the bathroom when she went on their first date when she spilled the wine on herself. It's the same woman. So she was there briefly, and then she eventually left. Okay, so it's after the service, and Allison is trying to rush off because she's made this agreement with Gladys and Dennis that she's going to be there. She's going to have the body there by a certain time so that they can bury him. And so she's trying to rush off. And of course, at the end of the service, people are, giving their condolences and, their hugs and the whole thing. And then this black guy walks up to her and saying, he's going to be sorely missed. We're going to miss him at the hospital and da-da-da-da. And so she's like, huh? What do you mean? And she's like, oh, he was just a wonderful person. And so of course the sons are standing off to the side like, the hospital? Like, what are you talking about? She was just basically like, oh, okay, well, I'm sorry, but I have to go. Da-da. So she wants to cut it short. Again, she's trying to, you can tell she's stressed because she's trying to get all of this done. And she finally gets away. They get the body into the hearse, and they're on their way. And so Gordon is now asking questions like, why couldn't we do this the next day? What's the rush? Who was that guy from the hospital saying he knew that? And she basically just says, Gordon, like, she just wanted him to stop talking. And then, she apologized for snapping at him, but Gordon is like, his wheels are spinning like, some things are not adding up. So they arrive at the gravesite at the same time that Dennis and Gladys arrives, right? So they're standing there. The priest is giving the service, and Gladys and Allison are not. I mean, they're just. It wasn't like a look of hatred. It wasn't a look any looks of like anger at each other. It was just, you could see, it was just a lot of pain on both their faces. Like, it was a lot. And so, even though they had the service, the burial, closer to Gladys and Dennis, Allison was still treated like as the wife. And so when it came time for the wife to throw dirt on the coffin, before they go through the whole thing, they went over to Allison. And you could tell Gladys got kind of sick, and Dennis ends up, they end up escorting her back to the car. And so after so that was all over, Gordon and Nigel, they went to the car, and Dennis wanted to, continue to talk to Allison. He basically, they talked about the headstone. She was like, Dennis said, we're not going to do a headstone. And so of course, Allison was like, he was basically like, that's what my mother wants. We're not going to do a headstone. And, he did talk about wanting a relationship with his half brothers. And of course, Allison was like, no, that's going to be impossible, because she's really working to protect their image and their idea of who their father was. And so of course Dennis wasn't happy with that, but I mean, it wasn't a whole lot he could do about that. And so he leaves, and so she's still there, kind of going over, probably just going over the stuff going over her head, like who was this man really? And then this guy walks up and he starts talking to her, and she was like, he had said something to her, and she said, well, I'm Mrs. Wilson. And he was like, oh, I'm sorry, I thought you were his daughter, because that's how she, like I said, when I say she's younger than him, he's probably got her about a good 30 years. Alexander. And so the man started talking, and then she ends up pulling the veil up, because she had a veil over her face, and he had called her Dorothy. And so she pulls the veil up, and she was like, who's Dorothy? And the man was like, oh, I've made a mistake. She was like, no. You thought that I was his wife. When I told you I was his wife, you called me Dorothy. So who is Dorothy? And so now you see her face is like, okay, what the hell is going on now? And that's pretty much how this episode ends. Like, okay, I guess in the next episode, we're going to find out who Dorothy is. So, it's a really good show. And, I'm hoping everything, all the loose ends are tied up. But, because like I said, it's only 3 episodes. But yeah, we need to watch the next episode to find out who Dorothy is. I'm going to end this here, and I will talk to you guys later.